In today's tutorial, I want to show you how to create loop post carousels in Elementor using the dynamic widget. So here's what we're going to be designing in today's tutorial. Here we have our posts here, and these are all in a carousel. So if you click on this arrow here, you notice that this is cycling through all our posts. And we can also do that by clicking over here on the bottom on these dots. Now, when we take a look at this layout, you'll notice that we have this really cool animation here. I will also show you how to create that. And all this here looks very, very neat. If you look at our titles here, they're all in the same line. They're all taking 2 lines. And also our excerpts here are pretty much the same size, making our design look very, very uniform and very, very neat. So I show you step by step how to create all of this. Now, over here on the sides, we have this half cut design. This is pretty cool because it entices people to want to click over here and see what is here on the sides. So if you look at that, it cycles through, and this is pretty cool. Again, I show you step by step how to create this. So before we get started, I want to show you something very interesting. If we wanted to create a similar layout using Elementor alone, here's what happens. So let's add a new container by clicking here on this plus button. So here's my container, and I'm going to come over here and search for my posts. So if I drag and drop them here, this is the layout that we are going to get. And it is quite difficult to customize it and make it look like how we want. I'm pretty sure you can agree with me that with a dynamic listing widget, we can create really awesome designs. Now, be sure to check out thePlusAddons.com and see all the amazing widgets that will help you design awesome looking websites. So the first thing you need to do is to create a new template. So here I'm in my dashboard. All you need to do is to head over here to template and then click on add new. Next, we want to give our template a name, but before we do that, we need to make sure that this is set to section. So I'm going to come all the way down here and choose section, and then here we're going to give it our template name. So the template name here, you can name it whatever you want. So I'm just going to call it Mac Posts, like that, and then click on create template. So here we don't need all these things over here because we're going to build ours from scratch. So I'm going to close out of here, and then I'm going to start creating my layout. So let's start off by adding our container. So I'm going to click here on this plus button, and my first container is going to be this one right here. I'm going to select that. Next, we also need to add a container within this main container. So I'm going to click here on this plus button here on the top, drag our container inside like that. Now, if you're going to be start getting confused, the good thing here is we can also use our structure or our navigator over here on the top right. So I'm just going to leave this open here so you can see what is happening. All right. So in here as well, we also need another container. So I know it's container within a container, but it all makes sense in a bit. So I'm going to come again, click here on this plus button, and then drag and drop my container in here. So before we start getting confused, let me start adding all the content that we need. So in our very first container, which is this top one here, we need to add an image. So I'm going to click here on this plus button, and then I'm going to come over here to my image and then drag and drop it, just like that. Now, the cool thing is, if you were to drop it in the wrong place, you can just drag it and make sure it's in the right place over here. So our image needs to be in the first container. This is very, very important. All right, so let's continue on. So this image here needs to be a dynamic image set as a featured image. So to do that, I'm going to hover over here on choose image and click on dynamic tags. Set this to featured image. But the challenge now is when we set this to featured image, we're not going to see anything as yet because we haven't set all our parameters yet. So what we need to do is to set a fallback image. So to do that, you want to click here on this wrench icon like that. Click on this plus button, and we are now going to choose our fallback image. Now, this image could be anything you want. It doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to choose is this image right here as my fallback image, and then click on select. All right, so the next step now to create our layout is to add a negative margin to this container right here. So I just want to make sure I'm clicking on the right one. So I'm going to come over here to the container on my structure here. So this is the one that I want. Next, I'm going to come over here to advanced. So if we apply a negative margin with these settings, it won't work because the chain link is switched on. So I want to get rid of that. And then I want to set this to -66. like that. All right, so now that we've added our negative margin, the second part to this is to click here on the second container, and we are going to set a set size. So we're going to come over here to boxed, set this to full width, and we're going to set this as a percentage, and we're going to set this to about 80%. So just drag the slider down until you get to about 80%. So with that selected now, we also want this centered. So to center it, we're going to come over here to advanced and then click on center. So now you can see everything is in the middle. The next step now is to add some rounded corners. So again, while this is selected, we're going to come over here to our border. So I think it's here on style, go to border, and we're going to set our radius to 30 pixels like that. Excellent. So I know right now we can't see anything in here, and that is because we haven't added a background color. So we might as well go ahead and do that. I'm going to come over here to background, click over here on classic, and we're going to set our color. And this is just going to be a basic color here, like white. And now you can start to see the rounded corners over there. So at the moment, we can see it here on the top, because on the bottom here, it's on a white background. But we're going to add a drop shadow, and this is going to be resolved in a bit. All right, so it's time now to start adding all our content. So I'm going to start off with adding our list. So I'm going to search here for our list, icon list, drag and drop it in place, just like that. Now, I'm not going to need all three of them, so I'm just going to get rid of these two right now. Next, I need to give this a background color, so I'm going to come over here to style. In fact, I need to go to advanced, and then I'm going to come all the way down here to background and choose my background color. Click here on classic, and then I'm just going to add a really dark blue, but of course, you can enter whatever color you want over here. So I'm going to go with something like that. Okay, that's great. The next step now is to give this a bit of padding. So I'm going to head over now to style. So I'm going to come over here to the top where it says layout, and my padding here is going to be 5 pixels. In fact, you know what? If I don't break the chain, it's going to add the same values here. So I need to break the chain first. So I need 5 to the top, 30 to the left, 5 to the bottom, and 30 to the right, just like that. Now I also need to add some rounded corners, but I'm going to add this in a moment because this text here is quite difficult to read on this dark background, so I need to adjust that. All right, so to do that, let me just close here, and then I'm going to go to my text over here on the style. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to come over here to my text, and I'm just going to add a lighter color here so that it's easier to read. And that's looking awesome already. Excellent. Now let's continue on and add more elements. So this time I need my post title to go in here. So I'm going to click on this plus button here on the top, drag and drop my heading like that. So I want this centered. So I'm going to click here like that. And the next step now is to make sure that this is set to post title. So I'm going to click here on dynamic tags, and we're going to come over here to post title. Okay, great. So all I need to do now is to set our fallback. So I'm just going to call this blog post. Oops. Okay, I'm going to set this to blog post. And with that set now, I also need to add my color in here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to click here on style and change this color here to a dark gray. So that things are just easier to read as I'm building my site. And we also need to add more content in here. So this time I need to add my post excerpts. So you're going to click here on this plus button and drag my text editor all the way down here, but below my title here. So with that selected now, what we need to do is to click here on dynamic tags and make sure we choose post excerpt. Next, we're going to come over here to this wrench and set my length here to 80. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because we want to make sure that our post excerpts are all the same number of words, because if these are all over the place, then we're going to have things not very consistent, and this will make our design look very ugly. So over here, we can see that our excerpts are not showing. This will show in a little bit, but let's continue on with our design. The next step now is to add my post date and author name. So for this, we're also going to need another container. So I'm going to come over here to the top and click on this plus button, and I'm going to drag this container, but make sure that it's inside here like that. In fact, you can see here that it's not in the right place. So this is why this structure here is going to work great. So now let's start adding all our content. So for here, we're going to need our text editor, drag and drop it in here. Now I'm going to need 2 of these. So I'm going to right click here and click on duplicate. All right, so in this container, we want things side by side. So I'm going to click here to activate this container and just change my direction like that. Next, I'm going to come over here now and just set my parameters. I'm going to click here on the first one, click on dynamic tags, and then I'm going to set this to post date. Select that. Great. On the next one, I'm going to click here again on the pencil icon, and this time I need to set this to author name. So make sure you click dynamic tags and then set your author name. So I'm going to scroll down until I find author name, and here it is. Great. So as you can see, these are side by side. Ideally, I want these centered. So I'm going to click here to activate this container and just make sure everything is centered just like that. So when we take a look at our design here, you can see everything is way too close to the edge. So what we need to do is to add some padding. So I'm going to click here on this container here and then come over here to advanced. So for our padding here, we're going to set this to 30. And now you can see things have a bit more breathing space. This is very important. All right, so now that we have this all set, the next step now is to come over here to this item here, which has an icon. And we don't really need this icon, so let me go ahead and get rid of it. So I'm going to come over here and we are going to select this. And under the icon here, let's go ahead and delete it like that. So all we have is this text here. Next, we are now going to give this some rounded corners. We need to come over here to advanced. So what we need here is border radius. So let's just set this to about 20. And already that looks great. So this is now consistent with the rounded corners here in our design. Okay, so moving on, one thing that's also very important is to make sure that on your post title here, you click on this pencil icon, make sure you set your HTML tag. This is great for SEO. So for this, I'm going to set this to H4. And also, we want that when someone clicks on this title, it takes them to the actual post itself. So to fix that, we need to come over here to our link, click on this drop down, and just make sure that this is set to post URL. Select that. And pretty much now we're good to go. All right, so let's continue on. Now, when we take a look at this container here, we can see that it doesn't look right because it doesn't have a drop shadow. So this is what we need to do so we can separate it from the background. So I'm going to activate it by clicking it here. And then we're going to come over here to style, go to border. And just below border here, you're going to notice we have an option for drop shadow. So click on that. And already now we can see our rounded corners and our drop shadow has now been added. So I'm going to leave this as it is, but if you want to go in and further customize it, you can always go in and further customize it here by adding a bit of blur if you want to do that. So let's just bring this up to about, let's say 32, and pretty much we are good. So now when I click away from it, you can see now that our background here is now separated because of the drop shadow that we've just added. Okay, so moving on, let's add our rounded corners to our top image here. So I'm going to make sure it's selected. I mean, at this point, I don't really need this structure here, so I'm going to close it, and then I'm going to click here on this pencil icon to activate my image. Next, I'm going to come over here to style, and for our border radius, I'm going to set this to 30 for the bottom. In fact, you can see everything's all selected, but that's not what we want. So let's break the chain and just leave the bottom and the left. So on the top here, I'm going to set this to 0, and then on the right, 0. So this is now the structure that we're looking for. So far everything is going according to plan, and it's looking great. Now, before we move on to the next part, I have a very cool effect that I'm going to show you, so make sure you tune in until the end of this tutorial. Okay, so pretty much our template now is completely designed. So the next step now is to apply this onto a brand new page. But before we do that, let's go ahead and publish this. So I'm going to click here on publish, and now you can see that everything is looking great. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and let's create a brand new page. So let's give this page a name. So I'm going to click on add new, and let's just call this my posts. But of course you can name this page whatever you want. Next, I'm going to click on publish, and then click on edit with Elementor. Now let's just create a design for our top part of the page. So I'm going to click here on this plus button and choose my direction. And then over here, we need to add a background color. So I'm going to click on the container itself, come over here to style, click here on background, and then we're going to add our background color. And again, this is just going to be a pretty much the dark blue, nothing fancy. All right, so in here now we need to add our page title. So I'm going to drag and drop it in here. So with that selected, first of all, let's set it to centered. And then over here, I'm just going to come to dynamic tags and then set this to post title. Great. Now let's head over back to our main container like that. Click on layout. And what I'm going to do now is to set a minimum height. So I'm going to click on this drop down here and set it to VH. So here on the minimum height, I'm going to set this to, let's start with 40. Well, that's too much. So let's go back to about 30, maybe even 20. Okay. And then finally, I just want to make sure that my title here is centered. So I'm going to come over here and just make sure this is centered. And for my text here, I want to make it slightly bigger. So again, I'm going to click here on this pencil icon and let's increase the size of that by coming over here to style, typography. And I'm going to set my size here, make this slightly bigger. So I'm going to go with maybe 42. So with that all set now, it's time now to enter into our content and add our carousel. So I'm going to click on this plus button here, click on my structure. All right, so what we need now is to add our dynamic listing widget. So first of all, I'm going to click here on this plus button and search for it. So I'm going to search for dynamic, and here it is. I'm going to drag and drop it. So off the bat, this is what it looks like by default. So what we are going to do now is to come over here to our style and choose custom skin. So the reason why we're doing this is because we need now to bring in the template that we've just created. So I'm going to come over here and I think I called it Mac Post. So I'm going to select it and here is what it looks like. By default, this is set to grid. So let's just change this to carousel because we need to cycle through all our blog posts. So with that selected now, you're going to notice that we're going to have these buttons here on the bottom, which now can cycle through. But we're not done yet because I want to show you some more features because this dynamic listing widget has amazing features. So before we go into that, let's add some breathing space here for our content in this section. So I'm going to click here on this container. And again, what we're going to do is to set our minimum height. So this is going to be done with this VH. So I'm going to set this to, let's try 80 and see what that looks like. So you notice that the space is going to be added to the bottom. So in fact, you know what, let's set it to 100 like that. But we want this centered. So I'm going to click here. Okay, so let's start customizing this now. So to further customize this, we want to come back and click on this pencil icon and come over here to advanced. So if we want everything all centered and looking great, let's scroll all the way down here until we get to plus extras equal height. So if I click here, you can see here it's disabled. We want to make sure that this is enabled. The next part is we want that our post title here are going to all be in the same line. So we're going to add a bit of code here. So what we need to do is on this equal height, at the moment it's based on a div level. So we want to click here on this drop down and choose unique class. Next, over here, we need to add the class. So the class is going to be post title. So the next part to this is to click here on this container like that. Come over here to advanced. Click on plus extras equal height. And just like before, we need to enable it like that. Change this from div level to unique class. And over here for the class name, it needs to be set to post description. So it's post dash DESC. Now let me show you the amazing features that we have in our dynamic listing widget. So what we need to do is to select our item here like that, come over here to style, and then we're going to come to our carousel options. Now here we have a ton of features. So first of all, we have our slider mode. We can turn this from horizontal to vertical if we needed to. We can also adjust the speed. Now, what is really cool as well is we can design this so that it looks great on tablet and mobile. So at the moment here, you can see we have a column of 4. I can actually customize this and add a column of 3. Personally, I prefer 3 because that way, all our content is going to show pretty much much better. Look at that. This is already looking much better. So over here, we also have previous set to 1 column, but I'm just going to leave it as it is. But if you want, you can see all visible columns and then select that. So as we cycle through this, Now over here, we can also add our slide padding. So let's say you want to add a bit of padding inside here. You can always go in and say add 20, for example. And now you can see that we have 20 pixels around our border. But I'm going to leave this as it is. So the most important thing here is we can see that there's a lot of customizations to this. So we can pause on hover. We have an option for that. Adaptive height, we also have an option for that. Multi-drag, so if you want, let's say you're watching this on a mobile device, we can also add a slide feature where you can use your finger to go through and drag them. So you can activate it over here if you wanted to, but I'm going to leave it as it is. Now over here on the slide animation, there's quite a few. You can fade in and fade out, but I prefer to leave this on default. Now let's take a look here at our animation type. At the moment, it's set with hold, but we also have continuous, and we can also set this to autoplay. So when someone visits the page, all these posts will be just autoplaying. But if you don't want that, you can just set it to off, and that pretty much is activated as we click our arrows. Now for our dots now, we also have a style here to these dots. So look at this, we have 7 styles. So at the moment we have these dots here, but you can go and cycle through all these and see the different options that we have. Now this is the opposite of what we just had. We can move on to style number 3. And as you can see here, things are now changing. Let's go to style number 6. And as you can see here, all these are changing. So the one that's selected will have that line on it. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to take this back to 1. And over here, we can also set our colors for the dots. We can also add the padding to the dots. We can hover on the dots and so on. Okay, so moving on over here, we also have these arrows. So if we activate this, we are now going to be able to see the arrows on the left and the right over here like that. So these are also highly customizable. So let me just show you. So first of all, we have our different styles. So we can go with style 2, for example. And this only shows up when you hover over it. We can further customize this by adding different colors. So we have our arrow background here. We also have our arrow color. You can add all sorts of stuff. Now over here, the one really cool thing as well is we can add the arrows outside the container. So if I click on that, you notice now that our arrows are now outside. So as I mentioned, we can further customize this. So we have our on hover arrow. So if I activate that, this only shows up when I hover, but I prefer to leave them on because that's that's pretty cool. Now we also have another feature here which is really amazing, the center mode. So if I activate this, notice what happens. We can now add our center padding. So let me increase this a little bit so you can see what I mean. So on the side here, we can see that we have a hint of something that's showing on the side. Now, this is pretty cool because this entices someone to want to click the arrow to see what that blog post is about. So you can further adjust this, the size-wise like that. But if you do this, you may want to decrease the amount that are showing over here. So let me just show you quickly how you would do that. So instead of having our column here to 3, let's set this to 2 so that we have enough space for the side columns. Look at that. So this already is looking much, much better. So when we click on that, now that swaps and that also leaves the sides here showing. So this is a really, really cool feature, and this is called center mode. And as I mentioned, you can adjust the sizes here. So let me bring it down to 80, and I think that's the optimal size. So we can further come over here and adjust our center slide effects. We can scale it, we can add a shadow, and we can also add the number of rows here. This style that we've just designed today does not only apply on blog posts, but it also can be used to display your products for WooCommerce. We also have a tutorial. I'll link that in the video description below so that you can take a look at part 1. But we have a lot more tutorials coming up to show you how we can use these unique designs to showcase all your products or even your blog posts. So moving on, remember I mentioned that I have a really cool feature that I wanted to show you. So let me show you how that works. So the feature here is when you mouse over this image, this is going to sort of like show an effect where it's sort of like is pressed in. So to apply that effect that I promised you in the beginning of the video, you need to head over back to our template. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that this image here is selected. So I'm going to click here to activate it. Next, you want to come over here to style. So for this to work, normally you're on normal here, but you want to activate it on hover. So I'm going to select hover here. And once this is selected, we're going to come over here to hover animation. So there's a few animations that you can add here. So the one that we need to add is shrink. So I'm going to select that. And now notice what happens when I mouse over it. Boom. Look at that. So that's a really cool effect. We can further customize this if you wanted to, but this is the effect that we have. And now if I save this and publish this, let's head over back to our page and see what this looks like. So over here, I'm going to publish, and then I'm going to view this in a new tab. Now take a look at the effect. So when I mouse over here, you can see that we have that really cool effect. If you found this video helpful, please do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and also the bell notification. By doing so, you'll be notified when we release new tutorials. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.